Do you know what flavor forward means, Taplines listener? I'm sure you can figure it out. In recent years, the beverage alcohol industry has flocked to this buzzword as an internal way to describe products with bold flavors marketed as such, which are themselves all the rage because the American drinking public has largely reaffirmed its collective thirst for fruity, uncomplicated, easy-to-approach drinks. You could think of White Claw or Beatbox or Screwball peanut butter whiskey or so many other white space innovations as examples of successful flavor-forward beverages in your contemporary marketplace. I mean, you don't have to. That's your business. But the history of the modern American beer business is our business here at Taplines, and today we're turning our attention to one of the earliest successful forays into flavor-forward beer by the country's biggest brewer. Our guest this episode is Jeff Musial, a BevAlc industry veteran who is working in research and development for new products at Anheuser-Busch in the mid-aughts. This was a heady moment for the St. Louis giant. Bud Light sales were slowing and would peak in 2008, the same year that the Brazilian-led Belgian outfit InBev would complete its hostile takeover of the firm. But before any of that, Jeff and his team would land on a new line extension of the AB flagship, Bud Light Lime, that cracked the code on creating and marketing flavor-forward fruited versions of light lagers for the United States' leading purveyor of them. It's Jeff Musial, it's Bud Light Lime, it's when AB's flagship first went fruity, and it's all right here, right now, on Vine Pair's Taplines. Yes, Taplines listeners, welcome, of course, to the Taplines virtual studio. We've got a ripper of an episode here today, and for those of you who are listening and not watching the episode, I do want to set the scene because by a chance coincidence in the podcasting cosmos, me, Dave Infante, and my illustrious guest, Jeff Musial, both happen to be wearing the same color shirt. It's green. And that's relevant because today we're going to be talking about a little brand, a little line extension that hit the U.S. beer market hard in the late aughts that was, a little bit green itself. I'm talking, of course, about Bud Light Lime. We're going to get to it, but first, let's get to our guest, Jeff Musial. Thank you so much for joining us here on Taplines.
Dave, it's great. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, right on, man. Where are you joining us from?
I'm joining you from St. Louis, Missouri, home of Anheuser-Busch.
I was going to say, a little town well-known in American beer industry history, the beating heart, of so much of what has sort of driven the industry forward over the last 100 years. We're going to talk about one innovation, one product that drove the industry forward and into, I would argue, new and sort of uncharted new spaces that you worked on at Anheuser-Busch with Bud Light Lime, of course. But before we get there, give our listeners a little bit of a background on your beverage alcohol industry journey. You didn't just wake up one morning and find yourself working on Bud Light Lime. It was a journey. Tell us how you got there.
It was. I was in school and I saw this ad in Ad Age when they still had ads in Ad Age.
Yeah.
For a job as a market research analyst at Anheuser-Busch. I didn't really know what that was, but I knew, of course, being in St. Louis, that I was interested in business, and so I applied for that, and I got that job. And after a few years, I moved down to Louisville, Kentucky, to work for a company called Brown-Forman Beverages, and I first on the research side and on the brand side on Jack Daniel's and Southern Comfort. I actually launched Jack Daniel's Single Barrel, which was a highlight of my career. Really did. I was just down in Lynchburg actually a couple weeks ago. I hadn't been down there for a while.
Yeah.
To see that, and then I came back to St. Louis around 2000, 2001, and I was at AB InBev to 2015.
Right on, man. So you've been a journeyman in the beverage alcohol industry, and these days you still do work in the beverage alcohol industry.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry.
In a different capacity.
And then I've been doing consulting with a variety of companies, craft beer companies, wine, spirits, And that's just about a half my clients, but I do other stuff as well. But yeah, that's so I've kept my hand in the game till now.
Yeah, right on. Jeff, when we do these episodes here on Taplines, listeners have heard me. We have a little gimmick that we like to do, or I like to do, and everyone else has to suffer through. It's called the Taplines Time Machine, and our guests. This is a history podcast, of course. History, we've got to pick a year. We've got to start somewhere. And I like to leave that up to our guest who, you lived through the launch of Bud Light Lime, a very successful and in its way, groundbreaking line extension on the flagship, the bestseller, at AB, Bud Light, of course. Where, in your mind, what year would you like to scroll back to at the Taplines Time Machine? Where does this start?
Are you asking me to just pick a year you're going to talk about it, or?
Oh, I want you to, if you would, or if one comes to mind, think back on when the idea for Bud Light Lime first sort of started gestating within the halls of power in St. Louis.
Let's go back in 2007 then, Dave.
Take us there. Okay, cool. So where are you in 2007? You're back at AB. You're at the mothership in St. Louis. You're back from liquor country. You're no longer working on Jack Daniels. Right. Set the scene for us a little bit for so many listeners who either haven't worked at AB or are too young to remember what AB even was pre-InBev. Set the scene, man. I mean, this is the pride before the fall to some extent. Tell us what AB was like in 2007.
Well, it was a time of transition. So the older guard, including Mr. Bush III, was transitioning out in August. The 4th had just come into kind of power, so to speak, or they were considering that. And so they were looking for some new ideas on how to run the company that wasn't so top-down driven. And so really, and I'll tell you the story about this, but that was about 2007. And that was the time they brought in a consulting group that had done work with a lot of larger packaged goods companies. And that's kind of how Bud Light Lime got its, given a tease, kind of got its idea.
Okay, so as you said, the third is still very much in the picture, but the 4th is being sort of groomed. Everyone, I think at that point, you correct me if I'm wrong, but everyone kind of understands him to be the heir apparent at that point. There was little question about the fact that he was going to be taking over, at least in some capacity. There was but as you say, it sounds like there was a new openness to the idea that, okay, like we've got to bring in outside ideas. Do you remember the consulting firm?
Yeah, it was called the Cambridge Group. There were a bunch of really sharp people out of Chicago, and we basically I don't even remember how they got involved with this with AB, but all I knew is as a director of insights there that I was here. We're going to do this project. You're on the team, and we had probably about 15 people. The consulting groups here. Mm-hmm. Internally at AB, probably about 15 people, everywhere from national accounts to sales to market research to brand management to a couple more senior people were involved on this project. And the project was really not Bud Light Lime. It was not even Bud Light. The project was something called creating a market segmentation or a demand landscape. And a lot of large packaged goods companies do this where they're interviewing consumers that are in the category. Like we talked to 1,500 people, did a long survey. And what you do with that, and that's where Cambridge came in. We didn't have this knowledge before. And what you can do with that is really segment people into kind of lifestyle, instead of just saying, oh, they're a young male or an older Hispanic. You're putting them into their lifestyles and their beer usage, and then also kind of their needs for beer, why they drink beer. It may seem like there's only one or two, right? I want to get drunk or I want to just relax. But there's about
you're right.
There's about 7 actually, and so what you do with that? The idea was to understand for Anheuser-Busch, because obviously we had a 50% share. So, but what you're looking for are gaps in your portfolio to figure out, hey, where can we get more volume? Where we're not. What will get us to 53? Share.
Sure.
And so that's what this demand landscape, without getting too geeky nerdy on you with research, was meant to do. And that's what Cambridge helped us with.
What did you worked on prior to tapping in with Cambridge and starting to work? Like, had you launched other brands for ABI or for AB, excuse me, at that point? Yeah. Tell us what you had worked on directly prior to what would become Bud Light Lime.
Well, you mean at AB, not at Brown-Forman?
At AB, yeah. Like, what was the previous launch? Yeah.
Well, the previous launch might have been Anheuser World Select, which was supposed to go after Heineken at the time. It might have been Bare Knuckle Stout, which was
going after
that's right. Occasion. Remember that?
Yep.
It might have been B to the E, which was a Bud energy drink, or Tilt, which was another energy drink. It might have been Bacardi Silver, which was an FMB, which were, of course, hot at the time. If you remember, that was, Smirnoff Ice basically launched in like 2001, 2002. So it was still rocking, right? And so that FMB thing, which was part of the reason for Bud Light, was growing and taking volume from beer. I mean, traditional beer.
Yep.
So I could keep going, but those are 5 or 6 that I remember.
Those are the ones you remember. Gotcha. Yeah, no, that and what was the flagship, the internal perception of the flagship at that point, Jeff? How did people understand the Bud Light franchise, the Bud Light, brand at AB, at St. Louis? I mean, this was still on the rise. If I remember correctly, Bud Light sales didn't peak until 2008. So it was still going up in 2007.
It wasn't peaking, but it also wasn't growing at 5% anymore.
Yeah. Right.
So, there was a thought, obviously, that, of course, I mean, the company was imbued with Bud Light and Budweiser. Michelob Ultra, which is now huge at the time, had only launched a couple of years before. That's a whole nother podcast, by the way.
Michelob Ultra, man, what a juggernaut, right?
I forgot to mention that. I was involved with that as well. So,
no kidding.
So that was that's a great story. So the Bud Light was obviously, when we went out, we were out in the marketplace when we were doing research. Bud Light was often front and center, and people just knew the brand. It was about sports. It was about music, having fun in bars. It was about kind of have a blue collar, everyman's feel to it. But again, when you're looking, you can see a brand, it's not growing like it was. And so it's like, okay, what do we do now?
What was hot outside of, at the competition? I mean, the big competition at that point is Miller, which Philip Morris had already sold. Miller joined, I forget who owned Miller at that point. Maybe no one did, but they were in the partnership with Coors. Who were the biggest competitors, I guess, at that point? And what were the hot brands that you remember at that time?
Corona,
yeah.
So if you think about light beer, and I remember saying this back, so Corona had, Bud Light had good imagery, but Corona had some deeper imagery to it. And it was also perceived as a very light beer. And obviously, with the Hispanic population growing as it was, Bud Light did great with Hispanic consumers, but of course, Corona did better. So really, it was looking at what's growing strong. Okay, Corona and FMBs. I think Mike's was right around then.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, sure.
Smirnoff Ice, and that was all hot as well. Those were the growing segments.
So you're talking about, you just mentioned a bunch of brands, and a lot of those, if not all of them, clear bottles. Bud Light, brown bottle. So Tell us a little bit. I mean, I'm sort of jumping the gun here, but indulge me, Jeff. Like, clear bottle, the beer quality, it gets damaged by the sun. Brewers hate it because it has less of a shelf life, yada, yada, yada. But it is undeniably a powerful image on the beer shelf, and it works. It worked for Corona for years. Tell us about, well, that's a good way to get into it, right? Like, let's talk a little bit about the development of Bud Light Lime as such, man. So Cambridge comes in. You guys are talking through demand landscape. Let's figure out how to incremental scale sales for the Bud Light brand. Let's find a way to talk to these Hispanic drinkers. What would eventually come out of all that is a clear bottled product called Bud Light Lime. How do we get from A to Z, man? How does it go from concept to reality?
Well, the company was believed in a really good blend of creativity and doing your homework. And so that means you don't go super fast, right? But you're also got a better ability to, hit the sweet spot, so to speak, to increase your batting average. It's a baseball analogy. So what happened was we had this task force, and so it was like, well, the demand landscape said for Bud Light, this is really why the bottle's clear, in a way. Said that we're really low in this thing called outdoor refreshment. And outdoor refreshment are the times, it's a kind of a think about outdoor barbecues, beach, pool, neighbor's back deck. It's 5:00 in the afternoon, kind of like that margarita FMB kind of time. And Bud Light really didn't get a lot of volume there. Of course, we got a lot of volume in general.
Right.
But if you look
compared to other occasions,
compared to where Corona was or FMBs, it was very low. And it was also lower among females and a couple of those other kind of target groups I mentioned before.
Sure.
And so then it's like, well, we know where we need to get the volume. How do we develop a product that will get us at that occasion? Well, you just mentioned clear bottle. Another thing is taste profile. So we went back and this is probably over 2 or 3 months, and working with agencies, obviously, and developed some called brand positionings to run by consumers. And Dave, it was important, especially at the time, we didn't want to upset this was the first line extension Bud Light ever did. So the company was very nervous about this. So we didn't want to piss anybody off, so to speak.
Of course.
So we made sure in this research we were doing, we were always talking to not only the people that drank fruity beers and Corona, but also, let's throw in a few focus groups of hardcore Bud Light drinkers. So that's the background. So let's talk about the positioning and the packaging. Essentially, what we did was we had an agency. We developed several options from close in a brown bottle all the way out to something that was really, really funky that, in terms of the positioning and the package. And I remember working on these. And if I look back, what kind of came out was, let's not be too funky because the Bud Light drinkers don't like that. So let's just take a couple steps out for Bud Light.
Yeah.
And what does that look like? Well, that looks like we need to make sure it's, here we go. This is a can.
Listeners, for anyone who can't see, Jeff.
They can hear that, though. That's good. I'm so thirsty. So let's make some green there for color cues, but don't overgreen it, because if you overgreen it, then it's going to be too sweet, too feminine. But the clear bottle was among the target, as you might expect. They wanted a clear bottle that says refreshing, fun, not so masculine, right? And so that's where the clear bottle kind of came from.
Yeah. Jeff, you mentioned something there that I want to follow up on just quickly, Jeff. You mentioned the idea that this was the fact that this was the first time Bud Light was going to be extended as a brand, right? This was the first line extension that AB was going to do on the flagship. I know there's a lot of sort of varying ideas or varying schools of thought about line extensions, both within the beer industry and then just more generally in the world of product development and product branding. Right. I'm curious if you could speak to a little bit what the climate or what the mood, the milieu was at AB in 2007, 2008-ish, about the idea of line extensions. I mean, Bud Light Lime is going to be the first Bud Light line extension, but there had been other dabbles in the practice of line extending. I'm thinking specifically about Budweiser, the former flagship, right? The king of beers had been extended many a times. Tell us a little bit about what the going wisdom was in St. Louis at that time about extensions.
I think that, they had extended off a main brand. You think about Busch, Bud, and Michelob, right? All those got light versions of them. And as the market went that way, I think, and I'm going back well before me.
Sure.
Natural Light, they didn't want to do Bud Light. They did Natural Light.
That's right.
Initially.
That's right.
They didn't want to do Bud Light. And so that was very old school, right? That was going back to, what was that, Trout and Reese or whatever, that don't line extend it, they'll kill your brand. Mm-hmm. And that didn't really work if you think about with Bud and Bud Light, because while at the end of the day, Bud Light did kill Budweiser, not kill, but take 2/3 of its volume essentially. That took like 20 years. And if you wouldn't have had those two brands combined, that Anheuser-Busch wouldn't have been the juggernaut that it was. It wouldn't have had, if it wouldn't have had Bud Light, Budweiser would have never done that. And so I think it was a good decision to make. But I think at the same time with Bud Light, things weren't declining. They were soft. They weren't growing 5%. They were only growing 1 or 2%. Mm-hmm. So again, but I think that there was this idea going back to that research and how strong that was, and clear that Bud Light was not getting as much in those occasions as Corona, Smirnoff Ice, even, remember like Leinenkugel, even there were some flavored beers back then. And we weren't getting any of that volume, or very little of it. So that's why it was pretty clear when we did that research report that Bud Light needed to go that way. And in order to do that, you couldn't just advertise your way into that.
Right.
You need a different product. If you everything else, like you said, Dave, was in a clear bottle. And not only that, the taste profiles of those things are lighter and fruitier.
Yep.
Bud Light ain't going to get that. So that's why I think they were. That's why I think, plus that kind of changing from, trying to give August the 4th, more rein on what to do. I think that's why that happened.
Yeah. One piece of the puzzle that I think to the American drinking public, the civilians, the rank and file who aren't in the trade, so to speak, that often gets lost or sort of functions behind the curtain, but is nonetheless an incredibly important part of the business, if not a pivotal part of the business of selling alcohol, is getting the middle tier, the wholesalers, the distributors, the guys actually, driving the trucks and stocking the beer aisles, getting them on board with new launches. And we talked about this with many of our guests on Taplines over the almost year and a half that we've been producing this show, not just at AB, but at any company. You've got to get the boots on the ground, the folks who are actually out there pushing product, to be bought in on the viability of this product, right? Tell us a little bit. Do you remember liaising with the wholesalers at AB about Bud Light Lime?
Yeah, no, I'm smiling because I'm remembering times when I was at the wholesaler in Fredericksburg, Virginia, not too far from me. At like 4:30 in the morning to present, and I don't think it was Bud Light Lime, it was something else. Because what we obviously wanted to make sure of, or not we, the upper management and sales team, was that our wholesaler partners were very important at AB, very important. Wanted to make sure that they kind of got the story of why we're doing this, right? So it wasn't like research geeky, but it was here's the math behind this. We're not just doing this because, Jeff or Dave said this should be a good idea, right? We had the research behind it, and that same thing bled over into on the retail side, going to talk to national accounts. I remember going into 7-Eleven in Dallas and talking to them about, what was it? It wasn't Bud Light Lime. I forget. Anyway, and showing them, here's our lineup for the next couple of years, our innovation pipeline, and here's the reason why we're doing these things. So as a partner, you can buy in with us.
Yeah. What for those who maybe have never been privy to that dynamic, and of course that dynamic has evolved enormously in the intervening 16. We're recording this in 2024, so that would be 16-ish years, right? The relationship between ABI's distributors these days and AB's distributors then is much different. But back then, Jeff, is there push and pull? I mean, the distributors famously at that time, in terms of the contemporary reports, folks write about this was the mighty best-in-class Anheuser-Busch distribution network, right? This is the red network. This is the creme de la creme, but there's still dialogue there. There's still maybe points of friction around it. Can you characterize a little bit like what that looks like when you're going to talk to the wholesalers at 4:30 in the morning? Are they excited to have someone from St. Louis, or are they like, oh, here we go again with another thing they want us to push?
No, I think in general, I think generally they were excited to have someone from St. Louis. I think 90% of the time it was a good, and you were some of those national sales meetings and marketing meetings. I don't know if you were there or anyone else you knew was there pre-InBev.
No.
But, there was some there, but it was trying to be constructive. It wasn't like, if these guys from St. Louis are here, let's dump them off the airport as soon as we can. I mean, I remember, right. I remember they picked me up at 8 o'clock in the morning for some, when we do these kind of, in market kind of, just kind of, look around and how can you improve? And there were times they wouldn't be back to the hotel like 10 o'clock at night. And I'd be like, that is all, of course, the off-premise person would pick me up at 7 o'clock, and then they'd go home at like 4. And they'd give me to the on-premise person at 4, and I'd be like, that was a long day. But
no kidding.
I'm using that as a way to say they wouldn't have done that if they didn't want to. They were very friendly, and it was a good environment.
Sure. What was the uptake like for Bud Light Lime? I mean, you go through the process of developing this product. You look at what's working. You look at AB's flank and see that, okay, Corona's doing well, Bacardi Silver doing well. Look at all these clear bottles. Let's develop a product that's going to target these occasions that we want. That's going to target these demos that we're not performing as well. And you've done the work to put the product out there. You go out and you do the ride-alongs, you do the pitches to distributors. It's a good, constructive relationship. It sounds like the troops got excited. It sounds like the network is excited to push this thing. How does it go early on? Like, what's the rollout like?
Well, Dave, if you don't mind, I want to go back and tell you one story that I think is interesting.
Go back.
I'm going to go back a little bit. I'm going to go back to the actual product, the product itself. I just did that so I could ever pick a beer. So we didn't know what it should taste like. And if you think about the range of flavored beers, they can go anywhere from just a tiny hint to, Smirnoff Ice, right?
Sure.
Where it's saturated in sugar and citrus. And so, brewing developed several different prototypes. And what I look back on is, at the time, Anheuser-Busch owned SeaWorld properties and Busch Gardens.
That's right.
And
that's right.
The smart thing we did was we used those to test consumer reaction to beers.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes I would just do that up at the brewery in St. Louis. We would just grab people. Let's say it was a shock top version, and we would have, now it's a blind taste test, so no one knows.
Sure.
Otherwise they'd say, oh, this is all wonderful, right? So, and we'd always taste a competitor like Lion and Kugel. Well, in this case, come with me back to Orlando in 2007 when we brought 150 people in the Target to SeaWorld in 2 different nights. And essentially what was done is we had enough product of 3 different versions of this Okay. And then we also at the time were testing Miller Chill, which was the only other flavored, citrus flavored beer out there. How about
Miller
that?
Chill. I forgot about Miller Chill. Yeah.
Right. So we didn't know what to test it against. So we're like, well, Miller Chill's there. So all these people, of course, we recruited these people to be beer drinkers. We give them, we're paying them whatever, $100, all the beer, not all the beer, but the beer they can drink, and we're giving them a cab slip back home, so there's no liability issues, of course. And so how this test would work is we would do, imagine just an outdoor pavilion with ping pong tables set up and pinballs and cards on the table, and we'd say, okay, we're going to give you some beers to sip. I want you to rate them. Back then it was paper and pen. And then the bar is going to be open for an hour, and you can drink whatever you want. Okay, so there's the two parts of this test. There's the quantitative part where that's blind, right? So you're taking a few sips and you're saying overall appeal, amount of lime, sweetness. Here's the next one, including Miller Chill and through the 3 Bud Light limes. And then we open the bar. So between those things, we know two things. We know just on a sip test, what was most appealing so we can get our best product out to market? And then how are we compared to Miller Chill? And then, in terms of volume, what do people drink the most of, right? Because sometimes, right, people will like the sweeter product, but they'll only have one of them.
Right.
So on goes, so we do the taste test, on goes the music, and an hour later we tell people you could only have four beers, but we're keeping track. They've got a wristband. We're keeping track of exactly what they drank. So here's what happened without going more detail. So at the end of that process, the Bud Light line that's in this can, I assume, on a scale of 1 to 10, got a 7.2, and Miller Chill got a 4.5.
Ooh, wow. Way out in front, Bud Light Lime.
Right. So you never see that in research. Basically, it kind of meant that Miller Chill sucked. But with all the taste tests that I've done in my life, or back then, 7.2 is a really good score. That's a good score, and so we knew a few things. We knew that we found the best product of those three. We knew to go to market, and then we found that it would do good volume. And then just wrapping that up, we also knew the product proposition. The concept was good. The people that we want to target. We knew that Bud Light drinkers, as we had, the current package, it didn't upset them or make it think it was not for them. And so it seemed like a winning proposition. So that's what went to market.
Gotcha. That's great. I love the fact that, again, if people haven't read the books or read the reporting or didn't live through this, it's easy to forget that Anheuser-Busch was in a bunch of different non-beer businesses. Only one of them was amusement parks, as you said, SeaWorld, Busch Gardens. They had a snacks business for a while, Eagle, whatever. Man, I love that SeaWorld customers, or you'd take people to SeaWorld to run focus groups or to run taste tests. Yeah, it's perfect, man. It's similar to you and I were emailing before we got on to record this episode. They pulled a similar stunt. Edmundo Macias, who was the brand lead on Tequiza, which predated Bud Light Lime by 6 to 7, 8 years. They did a similar thing to test Tequiza stuff out in SeaWorld. Go figure, man.
Yeah, that was before my time, but it was a really kind of genius idea because you were able, because it was we had a liquor license, right? So you could bring in these mass groups of people to do this. How else could you do that? You couldn't. If you didn't own that park, you couldn't probably do it.
Right.
And because you already had the wait staff there, you already had the facilities in the back with the kegs of beer.
It's a controlled
we did that.
Yeah, perfect.
I was down in Orlando about 7 or 8 times, and in San Diego 3 or 4 times. So we have that down. And that's really kind of the reason why, I don't need to, the old AB, they really did their research listening to their consumers. I think that's one of the reasons why the company won that beer war, beer wars from the 70s and 80s and 90s or whatever was because they listened to their customers better. They knew their customers better than the competition.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And listeners, if you're interested in light beer wars, we have done several episodes on that topic. I urge you to go check them out with Maureen Ogle, and we've talked about the launch of the light beer from Miller. We've talked about Bud Light, which was originally called Budweiser Light, first hitting the market and then being revised, and then Spuds McKenzie, of course, and Mr. Bush III, as Jeff calls him, saying to, I think it was Business Week at the time, said, "Tell Miller to come right along, but tell them to bring lots of money." He said we're going to spend them into the ground, basically, and they did, and AB did, to its credit. So, Jeff, let's jump back ahead briefly, if you'll indulge me. I think this is a great way to wrap up this episode. Let's talk about the initial reception of the product.
Sure.
We've gone through the logic behind it. We've gone through where AB was at the time. We've talked about the relationship between supplier and wholesaler. We talked about the taste test. Let's talk about how it played, man.
About a month into it, we ran out.
Well, that's a good sign.
Now I didn't. Of course, I was in the the research marketing, so I wasn't on the sales side or the But I remember people coming through the hall saying, "We've got to figure out how to allocate this because we ran out." I mean, so they didn't. Whoever was in charge of forecasting volume, which is well beyond my capabilities. Thought we'd have a 1.5 share, and we had a 3 share, something of that ilk, right?
Right.
And so they were able to, because when AB was going, they didn't mess around. So they they opened up another brewery on the East Coast probably within a month, right? And figured out how to start making it on the East Coast.
Wow.
And so, or the Southwest, wherever.
Yeah.
Out in LA. So that went away, and we were. Obviously, we got a lot of positive back. There was no really social media back there to track in terms of. I'm sure there would have been some naysayers with, more traditional Bud Light drinkers. But we would go into markets and we would talk to the wholesaler. We would do 4 or 5 focus groups of people, and we didn't see any negativity on Bud Light. A lot of Bud Light. There was some Bud Light cannibalization, obviously, but it was 20 or 30%, and you're just going to have to live with that.
Yep.
So if you're going to do that, but it was a lot of plus volume, and when we talk, here's what I got out of it: the traditional Bud Light drinker. Think back then, the 26-year-old guy that he would say. You know what? He'd kind of laugh at it a little bit. He'd look at it and go, "Oh, that's kind of, I would never drink that." But at the same time, they would rationalize it and say, "You know what? It's a beer brand. You got to go after new markets. I probably won't drink it." But it wasn't so off the mark that it was like
alienating. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well,
so that's how. And then I know that it had obviously after. We both know about FMBs, which this is kind of like an FMB, right? It's a flavored product. And those tend to, as that one article I sent you, those tend to do this, right? And so if you go way back in history, right, it goes wine coolers, spirit coolers, hard lemonade, ciders. And so this kind of followed a similar path where it had like 3 summers of rocking and rolling. Mm-hmm. And then it started, the 4th summer, it went down a little bit. And then the 5th summer it was down 20%. And then, so if I recall, that was, of course, that's 2013. That's still over 10 years ago. So, but that's how I remembered it. And what can we do to, and so eventually that's where you got to probably things like, not when I was there, but with InBev introducing like the orange product, Bud Light Orange.
Sure.
They wanted to do Bud Light cider when ciders were hot, and I've never seen people react more negatively to an idea ever.
That is a terrible idea.
I mean, they were the manager at the time was determined to do that because cider was so hot, and I just remember talking to my boss and going, I've never seen anyone, consumers, be so negative, laugh at an idea. Literally laugh.
I'm laughing at it 10 years later. That's hilarious.
Right.
Yeah.
So that didn't happen. But of course, since then they've done, the orange. They did Bud Lights. What was it? Limerita.
Limeritas. The Ritas were huge. Yeah, for a minute.
They were. Well, right, for 2 or 3 years they were. Right.
Yep.
That's just how that is. There's that. David. There's like that 10% of the market that is always looking for something that's trendy and new and fun. That's where that FMB kind of play in.
Yeah.
And then they get a few years of that, and then it's like, okay, what's the next thing? So
yeah. What we've sort of flicked at it here. This is a good way to wrap up. This will conclude. You've gone the distance here on Taplines. But looking back, I mean, you have the benefit of hindsight now. We're in 2024, and 16 years later, and you've seen a beverage alcohol market explode and go in a bunch of different directions, right? I mean, we now know what hard seltzer does in the American market. We watched a boom. We've watched that, if not totally fizzle, certainly, mature so rapidly, even more rapidly than, maybe people expected. And, we've watched consumers start to turn away from craft beer, that full flavored beer. I mean, that market is flat at this point. I think I guess what I'm getting at is Bud Light Lime strikes me as sort of this moment in time where beer was sort of opening itself up at the highest level, Anheuser-Busch, at the biggest scale, to this idea that beer could be a platform for flavor in a way that maybe people weren't as open to back in 2008. And now, I mean, it seems obvious, right? Like all the stuff that's working is this type of, fruit forward flavor, big flavor product that, maybe it is technically a beer, maybe it's not, maybe it's cane based, maybe it's spirits based, whatever, but it has a certain flavor profile, wins a certain occasion, as we were talking about earlier. This is a rambling way of asking the question, but the question is, Jeff, like, how do you view Bud Light Lime's legacy, given what you know now? I mean, you've got to see
I
some
kind of
touch
think
points.
you summed it up. I think you summed it up, Dave. I mean, I think it was the first excursion from a major beer brand into flavor. And I mean, I can't recall whether Coors or Miller or even the Sam Adams having a flavored beer out there at the time.
Yeah.
And so I think in that way it was a good stride for AB. And of course, that product proliferation, again, going back to 2008, and you look at the SKUs on the shelf, it would be laughable compared to today, right?
Not very many.
Just the craft beer alone, right? And the fridge size, right? I mean, think about the size, because there's just so many more SKUs and everything. Everybody wants the public wanted more variety.
Sure.
And so we gave it to them. So I think it was that first kind of salvo for mainstream beers doing that. And that just kind of kept leading on to where we are today.
Yeah. Well, I'll leave you, Jeff, with a brief story, a brief little gratitude from a younger Dave Infante. I was graduating college in 2010. I graduated from the University of Virginia. And when when I was younger, I was drinking about as much as I've ever drank in my life. I was what the industry might refer to as a heavy user. And Bud Light Lime was sort of the higher end. When we weren't drinking Total Swill, we would maybe get Bud Light Lime because we had a deck. At college, me and my buddies had a deck that we would sit out on a nice day, and the Bud Light Lime was the go-to. In fact, we even had a term for it. We said, there was a diner nearby that we always used to go to in Charlottesville in college, and you would get a breakfast, and then it was a combo, so you would get a juice of choice. And so the joke amongst our friend group, and for my juice of choice, a Bud Light Lime. So that was the gag from way back when. But thank you thank you for coming on Taplines and telling us a story. And thank you, for shepherding this unique and, I would argue, pretty groundbreaking product into existence back in 2007, 2008 at Anheuser-Busch pre-InBev back there in St. Louis. Jeff Musial, thank you so much, man. Thanks for coming on.
It was wonderful. It was great to walk down memory lane and have some Bud Light Lime. So
that's
all good.
I like it.
Okay.
All right. Taplines is recorded in Richmond, Virginia, and produced by yours truly and Darby Seaside, who, along with the talented Shane Farrick, composed our delightful soundtrack. Just listen to it. I also want to give a quick shout out to the entire VinePair team, and especially co-founders Adam Teeter and Josh Mallon, editor-in-chief Joanna Sciarrino, managing editor Tim McCurdy, and art director Danielle Grinberg, who designed our lovely Taplines logo. And of course, a big thank you to you, yes, you listener, for spending time with us week in and week out. We literally couldn't do this without you. I'm Dave Infante, and I'll catch you next time.